Morning, everybody. How's it going? It's Kate Titus from A Loyal Companion. Wow, we're only 2 minutes late. Not too bad. It's good to see everybody. We've got a good talk today. We're going to be talking about carpal hyperextension, so that's wrist stuff, and give you some insights on that, how it works, symptoms, causes, diagnosis, how to manage that at home if your dog has a carpal issue. Um, we're going to be going over all that today, and I think we're going to have it's going to be interesting, and I think we're going to have some fun and maybe answer some questions on how that works and what you can do and how to support your dog through that injury or degenerative disease. So let's go ahead and get started here. All right, let's talk about carpal joint basics and what we're going to be doing. Real quickly, we're going to talk about joint basics. We're going to talk about carpal hyperextension 101. We're going to talk about symptoms, causes, diagnosis, treatment management, and how to live with carpal hyperextension. And we're going to do all that in probably under 40 minutes, maybe less than a half an hour. We'll see how it goes. Remember, if you have any questions, please, I'd love to hear from you. You can key them in the comments section, and those will pop up, and I'd love to answer any questions that you have. Remember, I'm a youngest child, so I'm absolutely used to being interrupted. Thank you, John and David, for that as a growing up lesson. So let's go ahead and get started. So first of all, let's talk about real quick. I've got a screen right there, so if I peek over there, that's what I'm doing. Let's first talk about, what part of the body are we talking about? So my girl Helen is going to demonstrate for me. So we're going to talk about that spot right there. For us, that's the wrist. Okay. For them, also the wrist, but called a carpus. I love words, as you know. So if you think about if you or someone you know has carpal tunnel is in the wrist, right in here. Same thing on them. So this is the carpus right here, just to give you some landmarks. Obviously, let me see. This guy is the paw. There is the elbow, shoulder up in here, shoulder blade right there, just to kind of give you some reference, okay? And if you look really closely, you can see there's a little pad off the back there. You can check out your own dog on that too, just so you know kind of where we're talking about. Now let's take a quick look at the anatomy of the paw, just so we get a little bit better look. I think it helps to understand the joint better when you have an idea of what that looks like. So this appears to be a left paw. So these are the toes or the digits down here. You can see the little nail pieces. You can see the little nail pieces kind of sticking off here. So here's the toes. This is the pad. These are what's called the metacarpal bones. And then the carpus joint, or the carpal bones, are right in here. And remember, I talked about that little pad. That little pad is right off the back there. So I think it usually helps, or I feel like it helps, to be able to figure out with us, what does that look like? So this is a human hand here, in the same position that you would see a dog paw. Okay, so again, here are our digits right through here, and here are the dog digits and the nails coming off. And these guys right up in here, that is going to be our metacarpals. So if we look on the top, that's these guys. Okay, here's our digits. Here are the metacarpals. And then we've got the radius and the ulna coming down. So those are the bones in your forearm. Those are coming down right in here. Same thing with the dog. And we both have rows of carpal bones right in here. Okay, so let's pop back over to that last one we were looking at. And this will give you an idea. The carpus joint is a really, really complicated joint. So we've got lots of little bones up here that allow this to happen, right? And allow this to happen. And on your dog, allowing this to happen and this to happen as necessary, okay? So we've got two big bones. So the radius right here, that's your big bone in your forearm. That's the big one. That's the one that is on the outside. Okay, it's like the lateral bone, the big one on the outside. And that's the one that pivots to create movement. Okay, so if I want to move the wrist like this, that's a radius thing. The ulna is this kind of little guy over here, and it's on the inside of your arm and your dog's leg. And at the top, the ulna is what makes the elbow. Okay, so the little pointy over your elbow, that's actually your ulna. And then we have dogs and humans have these two rows here of carpal bones, and these little guys. There's all kinds of cartilage in here, and we've got ligaments which connect bone to bone. All of this stuff is being held together by a really complex set of basically pulleys and almost wheels, right? So we've got these ligaments. There's some tendons that are on the backside as well. So it's a really, really complicated joint. But it allows us to do, and allows your dogs to do, some pretty cool stuff. So let's talk about hyperextension. So when we're talking about hyperextension, we're talking about the joint going in a way that it doesn't go. So when a dog stands upright, okay, when they stand in a normal standing position, there shouldn't be any backward motion. Let's take a look at that paw again. Okay. So this is the carpus joint here, right? It's meant to bend back this way when your dog walks, right? So this comes up like that. But what happens when you have carpal hyperextension, there's damage to those ligaments that I was showing you in that first shot. So there's damage to all these ligaments in here. So this starts to bend. This starts to back out this way, okay? So the joint shouldn't bend this way. It should bend that way, right? It should bend back, not like that. And that's what's happening, is the joint is basically collapsing backward. So there are ligaments and the fibrous tissues like we were looking at on this guy. So all these guys, there can be a breakdown in those, and also on the inside or the underside, the palmar side of the paw. So those ligaments, those fibrous connective tissues that hold it together on the back of the carpus, they start to fail. And when they're damaged, they can't maintain that good upright position. Okay, so there are ligaments and tendons all along here, and there's too much pressure on this part, so the body this leg starts to just collapse right in there. So we end up with an angle that looks something like that, right? It's not pretty. It should be somewhere between, depending on the breed, somewhere between about 140 and maybe 170 or 180 degrees. So that's almost straight up. But we end up, so if we go back and look at Helen's got some pretty sturdy carpi there, right? She's almost 180 degrees from here to here, right? When I talk about degrees, that's what I'm talking about. Think about back to your math days, and we're thinking about, remember the old protractor? Do they use protractors anymore? I hope they do. Anyway, so the protractor, if we were to put that on there, from there to there to there, that's probably about 175 degrees right there. That's what we're looking for. I don't want Helen's carpus to be down over here. That would mean that it's collapsing or it's hyperextending. It's bending. It's extending too far beyond that 170 or 180 degrees. Okay. All right. Now, by having those ligaments fail or move or not be able to do their job, that forces the dog to walk on their palm. Okay, so when we were talking about that comparative anatomy shot here, so imagine us walking with our palm flat on the ground. Okay, so this is the palm. So if you look at the bottom of your dog's paw, they have digit pads, right? So those little pads that are underneath their toes. So that's these guys right here. Okay, so they've got 4 of those, and then they've got a big one. And that big one is called the metacarpal pad. Okay, so it's protecting this joint right in here. So if this starts to collapse, this is actually our palm. So this is considered the palmar surface underneath. Okay, so on us, that would be this. Because remember, our metacarpals are here. There's our palm. So that means they're walking all the way down on this surface. So this joint has failed back here. Portions of this joint are not able to do what they're supposed to do. So you can have varying degrees of instability. So maybe the wrist isn't all the way on the ground, but it's not as straight and as solid as it should be. Left untreated, this is definitely a point where degenerative joint disease, arthritis, that is going to be a major issue for your dog without some sort of support on this joint. Okay, let's come back over here and let's talk about symptoms. Okay, how do you know? Really, it's about how much instability is in your dog's wrists and how much is it flattening out? How much are we getting toward that really walking on the palmar surface of the paw and the metacarpals? And how straight is that angle? So there are different levels of instability, and there are also different ways that this happens. So we're going to talk about the causes in a second. But if this is a traumatic injury, there's going to be sharp vocalization. They're going to bark. They're going to whine. They're going to cry. This is really going to hurt. If it's degenerative, you'll start to the initial stages of this are going to happen over time. So a little bit of breakdown, a little bit of breakdown, a little bit of breakdown. So you're just going to kind of see the wrist just start to sink, and it literally looks like the dog is sinking onto the ground. There's going to be mild laxity in the joint, and there's going to be some mild overextension. Okay, so overextension means it's going backward. That heel part is going backward. So as it moves forward in this process, you're going to see increased lameness. So it's going to hurt. This is not a comfortable thing for your dog. You may see things like they don't want to go for as far of a walk. They may not want to go for a walk. They may not get up to see you. It's painful to get up and walk on this joint when it's hyperextending. So you're going to see increases in that laxity, whether that's forward and backward, or maybe that's side to side as well. So remember, this is a 3-dimensional joint. The laxity can create problems going in any direction. As it gets more advanced, they will start to walk on their palmar surface. So they will start to walk on that the underside, the palmar surface of the metacarpals. And we're going to show you a couple of pictures. So if you're a little queasy, I will let you know when those are coming, because they're pretty drastic examples. We just talked about the symptoms. Okay, so let's the final advanced stage. Again, they're walking on that palmar surface. Osteoarthritis has set in, and it's an issue. Usually there's some swelling, some heat. It's a really uncomfortable joint, and there's some pretty severe limping or lameness on that as well. So let's talk about causes. So there can be a lot of things. There are usually three causes that are identified for 3 general causes that are identified for why carpal hyperextension happens. Number one, it can happen in puppies when we get developmental abnormalities in the joint and the ligaments. So it could also be uneven growth of the radius and the ulna. Sometimes can cause some issues with the carpus if the ligaments are not attaching properly. It's usually something that's congenital, though, when we're talking about puppies. Second way is trauma. So one of the cases that I'm going to show you in a second is a very sweet young German Shepherd who got spooked while his dad was out helping the AC guy in the backyard. And for a few years, he had put all the dogs on the balcony so that and that was never an issue. But this guy got spooked and jumped off a second-story balcony. So we're going to show you kind of what that looks like. But the trauma, the lameness happens right away. There is no degenerative process. This isn't a slow process. This is oh boy, where the wrist is down. You think about in humans, we're talking about like a sprained wrist or maybe a broken wrist where the ligaments have given way, and perhaps there's a fracture involved as well. When we're talking about hyperextension, there normally is no fracture. It's usually soft tissue, ligaments, tendons that have been injured. The degree of lameness in that kind of situation is really going to depend on how much damage was done to the wrist itself. The third kind is that degenerative hyperextension we were talking about. So in this one, I see these usually in dogs who are overweight, who have had some rear end issues. So now the dog is leaning forward or dropping their limbs, their front legs behind them a little bit. So it's like their chest forward. And they're putting a lot of stress on those front legs. So like I said, it's usually the older dogs that I see with this, but weight is almost always a factor, and there's some sort of shifting that has often happened. So that shifting from the weight from the back end to the front. Now, dogs should carry about 60% of their weight up front, but they're adding more to it, either from a rear limb issue, a back issue. They're changing the way they carry their body. We've talked a lot about that when we've talked about doing your do-it-yourself mobility assessment, looking at how your dog stands and carries their body, either in movement or in stance, and really identifying some areas that could be a problem. So that picture that I showed you of Helen actually was taken in some of the filming we did for that and some still shots. So she has a nice square stance in that, and her shoulders are really where we'd like them to be. Let's take a quick look at Helen one more time on that. Let me switch over here. So you can see Helen is pretty square in her distribution. She's a little splay-footed, I think, because of where she's looking to get the treat, which is going to be coming from here. So she's kind of looking over her right, but her weight distribution is pretty good. It's pretty square on the back end. Her back is pretty flat. This leg is actually back a little further than it would probably normally be. This one over here, which is her right leg, is probably in a better position. You can see she's kind of leaning forward in anticipation of getting the treat. So you can start to see these little things if you really look at your dog and concentrate on what looks right and what doesn't. Okay, so let's talk about, I wanted to show you a couple of pictures. Okay, now is the time I'm going to show you some crazy pictures, okay? If you don't like things that make you a little queasy, now's the time to maybe get up and get a snack or go hug your dog, okay? This is Max. Max is the cutie pie that jumped off of the roof. He's still in his bandages before we did his casting. You can see that his foot should be here. You can see how flat he is on this paw. This one's a little bit higher off the ground. Just to give you an idea, this white piece of tape, this is where his wrist is. So this should be much further back, and he should be standing more on his toes than he is. Now, this next one is definitely more pronounced. So again, if you're not interested in this, please turn away. This is Gage. Now you can really see this is his paw, this is his wrist. He is all the way down. He's all the way down here. And you get a really good look at it here. So this angle should be almost straight down, okay? And you can see how the wrist is actually bending backward. There's the angle right here as I move my cursor through here. The angle should be about here. Okay, not a ton of an angulation. And you can see in this picture how far pitched forward he is. Gage has had a history. He's obviously overweight. He's also had a history of some rear limb issues as well. He also has some autoimmune issues, which are not helping his cause either. So this is an extreme hyperextension. Okay. All right, so we'll take that off the screen. If you left us for a minute, it's time to come back. You can look at the screen now. Okay, so how's your vet going to diagnose that? So normally they're going to want to do x-rays just to make sure that there's no fractures in there, there's no neoplasia, no cancer, anything like that. So they want to confirm the diagnosis and rule out anything else. Normally, these x-rays are done with a little bit of sedation, so your dog is a little bit sleepy, so that they can take what are called stressed views or stress views. So what they do is they put a something wooden and solid underneath your dog's paw. So think like a wooden spoon. Okay. And then they exert downward force on the elbow to try to create that standing angle. They're trying to mimic what that standing angle looks like. And then they can really measure how much hyperextension is in the joint. And they can also, they're also going to be feeling that joint, how much laxity is in it, how loose is it, which way is it moving? Is it moving forward and back, side to side? How much laxity is in that joint? Ideally, that should be a fairly snug joint. There's a little bit of movement, but movement that makes sense, not movement that's like whoop all the way over here or bending back the wrong way. There may also do, if they see something on the x-ray, they may also want to do some valley fever testing. For those of you not on the West Coast or in the Southern Arizona area, that is a fungal disease here that is a nasty little critter that has a lot of ways that it presents, and one of the ways is invading bone. So if they're seeing some craziness, they may want to run some valley fever tests there as well. So how do they treat this? So normally, when your vet sees a case like this and has confirmed that it is a hyperextension case, carpal hyperextension, there's usually a couple of options. First one is usually surgery. That's your standard of care if the dog can meet certain parameters. So relatively healthy, age is good, weight is good, and we need some support on those wrists. Normally what they'll do is they will perform what's called an arthrodesis. So they will create an environment within the joint by putting a plate on, usually it's on a couple of the metatarsals. We'll run it up the wrist that's well above it. So they're going to stop the bending of the wrist, the bad bending, the hyperextending, but also the good bending or the flexion of the wrist. So what happens is, because it is positioned and forced into that position, the body will eventually scar that over and it will fuse. So all of those bones, remember we had those 2 rows, there's 4 on the bottom, 2 on the top, those will all fuse together and will eliminate this wrist movement, the bad movement and the good movement. So that's called a carpal arthrodesis. If that's something that's on the table, I highly recommend you have an orthopedic surgeon do that. They are used to doing that on all different sizes of dogs. If your dog is obese or overweight, your veterinarian may say, you know what, we can't do the surgery until we get some weight off the dog, which is a challenge because you have a dog who doesn't really want to walk, but who needs the surgery so that can walk to get the weight off. So it can be a challenge sometimes, but it really comes down to, what's going to be the best option. So option number 1, your standard of care is going to be surgery. Do your surgical consult, talk to your surgeon, ask about expectations of outcome. What can we expect? And really, the demeanor or personality of your dog is going to play a big role in this too. You have to be able to keep your dog quiet for that 8 to 12 weeks post-op. And that doesn't mean strict crate rest. That means controlled exercise or restricted exercise, because they've screwed screws into the bone, and they've put a plate in there, and they're stopping a normal motion, the flexion of the paw, right? They're stopping that motion. So there's a lot of stress on that joint as the dog tries to use it, or because there's all that laxity in there, that there's no other support to keep it in its normal position. So you need to be prepared for the aftercare when you're considering that surgery. But again, it is standard of care, so it's always a good thing to consider. Number 2 is bracing. That's your second option. And remember Max, we saw him. Let's take a look at the braces that Max is wearing now. He just got them a few days ago. So these funky things, this is one of the tattoo patterns that we have. These are Max's brace. So you see this part right here. Remember that accessory carpal pad, that pad on the back? This is like a relief area, a padded area where that pad won't touch anything. It's an open space so that it can move around a little bit and not be squished down. That's why it's not a straight shot from top to bottom. Okay. So we got 3 straps across the top. His elbow is right there, the bend of his elbow. You can see that's kind of rounded right there. So his elbow can bend to move the leg. And if you also look right back here, you can see that we've got it's called a Dacron motion limiter. Okay, so this stops the movement of the paw. So remember, when we're trying to get that wrist to calm down, we still maybe want that paw to be able to move a little bit. Because remember, we can move the digits without moving the wrist, which is key here. So this is kind of like an arthrodesis. This is creating that situation or that environment within the body where the bones start to fuse because they can't move. You'll notice that there are no hinges here. So the wrist is right here. It's right here. So there's no hinge there. It's not going to bend. Now, in his case, I believe we have, you can see it better right there. We've put false hinge spaces in there. So if he does manage to get some repair on those ligaments, or he does go ahead and do a surgery, these can be used after surgery as well. But if he doesn't do surgery and he's recovering, we may be able to give him a little bit of bend, a little bit of flexion here in the brace, because we can put a hinge in there. We can put a hinge just like we have down here. So this is the hinge down here for the paw. So we have some options, and this is the one that our guy Max went with, and he's doing pretty well. And he's such a sweet guy, such a sweet guy. Okay, so one thing that you have to keep in mind is when you're trying to figure out what your options are as far as controlling that. And remember that it's rarely the best option, but doing nothing is also an option. It's a very painful option for your dog. But it is your third option. So you have to figure out where that is and what's right for your family and what's right for the dog. But the moderate to severe normally are going to require a surgical correction. But if you can't afford that for whatever reason, or you have a dog that has an internal disease, maybe they have Cushing's or Addison's or something that precludes them, or maybe they have a heart condition that precludes them from going through surgery, you do have a second option, and that is the bracing to keep that there. The moderate to severe are going to require a rigid back brace like the ones I just showed you. Some of the more minor sprain can get by with neoprene Orthopeds makes a brace that has neoprene with aluminum bars on the side, so it basically creates a hammock to keep the wrist where it's going. There's a little bit of bend to it, but it doesn't control nearly as much as the more rigid options. So when your dog is diagnosed with carpal hyperextension, really you've got a couple of things to keep an eye on. So you need to manage the pain, you need to manage the activity, and if you do the surgery, you need to be ready to manage that post-op care. When we're talking about managing pain, it's important that you talk to your veterinarian and explain to them the level of pain that you're seeing. So, we've done a few talks on the emotional aspects of pain, identifying pain in your dog. Make sure you go check those out. But in general, it's going to be things like excessive panting at inappropriate times. It's not cold outside. They haven't been active, but they're panting. A big one I see with these guys is licking the wrists. So if you have a light colored dog, you'll start to see discoloration on their paws and on their wrists from where they've been licking to self-soothe. And that word is self-soothe. That's a tough one to say on a Saturday morning. So watching for those, and even what they don't do. So maybe they don't want to go for a walk, or they go one house down and then they just sit and they stop because it's too painful to go any further, or they're not getting up to see you when you get home. Managing that pain is really job one. You can't do much, or ask your dog to do much without managing that pain and the inflammation that goes with it. So making sure you're managing that pain is essential. Number two, you have to manage the activity. So you may have a very high drive dog. One of my clients is a border collie, and she has severe carpal hyperextension. She's not totally plantigrade yet, down on her wrist or on her palm. Sorry, palmar grade. But she is still super active, and she loves ball play, and she loves getting up on the couch and jumping down. And every time I see one of these dogs jump off from any height, it just makes me cringe because I know how painful that has to be. So managing their environment is going to be really important as a way to manage their activity. So it's going to affect your life as much as it does your dog's life, because there are going to be, if you hiked with a dog that has carpal hyperextension, that's off the table until we figure out a way to get him or her more comfortable, whether that's braces and arthrodesis through surgery, anything like that. We got to figure out how to do that, but you still got to do something else with that energy. So making sure that you have some mental enrichment games ready to go, things that don't require a lot of pounding, jumping up and down. So if your dog loves to play ball, that ball needs to stay at ground level. There's no bouncing it. There's no tossing it. There's no throwing it up in the air and letting them catch, because they're just going to come down hard on those wrists. So finding different ways to keep your dog mentally engaged and happy is going to be really important. Food puzzles are great. If your dog likes the car rides are also fantastic. They get the smells, the sights, the sounds from being in the car without all of that pressure going down. The other thing to remember is weight is a big piece of this. So keeping your dog at a good weight may also require that you cut some of their food rations while you're figuring out what next steps are, because the last thing you want to have happen is for them to gain weight while you're figuring out this process. It just makes it worse on the body. So also being able to manage how they move their body and how they shift their weight, because remember, if your dog has hyperextension on, let's say it's just one limb, the weight distribution is going to be different. They're going to shift weight. Let's say it's the front right. Okay. They're going to shift that weight back to the opposite left. If you want to feel what that feels like, I want you to do a plank. So if you know what a plank is, you get down. It's almost like doing a push-up, but you got your elbows. You're on your forearms and you're in the edge of your hands. And then I want you to lift up one hand you're going to feel the weight shift back to your back leg. You're going to feel it go down your back. You're going to feel it in your butt. You're going to feel it in your left leg. It's going to go diagonally down the body. So making sure that you're taking care of that compensatory pain is going to be really important as well. So things like massage, swimming, acupuncture, those are all going to be great options to keep your dog as comfortable as possible as you're moving through the decision-making process here. If you do decide to go the surgical route, making sure you have a good boarded surgeon is a great option. Number one, make sure you understand what your post-op instructions are. What are they allowed to do? When are they allowed to do it? And have a plan going forward. You're also going to want to be working with a rehabilitation specialist. You can work with them to get your focus on what they're allowed to do, how we start to build the muscles back in the forearm, the deltoid, all of those upper back muscles as well, because remember, the dog hasn't used those much because they've been shifting weight away from that leg. So we got to build some strength, got to get some stamina back, get some balance back. If you do decide to go the brace route, there's still some strengthening and some work to be done with that as well, because normally these, if it's a severe case of hyperextension, there's going to be a paw segment on the bottom. So remember, we looked at Max's, and there's a place where he puts his paw in it. It looks like a boot. So that means that he's going to be walking like, imagine if you were to walk in one tennis shoe and no shoe or sock on the other side. There's going to be a little bit of a leg length differential, right? So helping him understand how to use and advance that leg and not create other issues as a result of having the support and changing his body position because he's wearing that brace, and he can no longer do the cheats that he had, which normally involve things like sinking down, shifting the weight backward to the opposite side. So we're taking away some of those cheaty options that he had created over time, if this was a degenerative case, or even fairly recently, if this was trauma, if he, jumped down off the couch, or God forbid, jumped off a second-story balcony, things like that. So we have, we got to work with him to get his body back and be able to carry it in the way that makes sense to him. Okay. All right. So that is, I did pretty well. That was pretty good. We're at like 35 minutes, not too bad. So I would love to answer any questions. If you have those, you can key those in now, or you can add them afterward. If you're watching this after the fact, go ahead and put those questions in there, and I'll be happy to answer those. I will say that carpal hyperextension is a really tough one. It's a really hard one to manage and to keep your dog comfortable, but it is so worth all the effort that you put in and all the changes that you make. So if you have any questions about that, you can get in touch with us here at A Loyal Companion. Send us an email if you'd like, info@aloyalcompanion.com. We're happy to answer those, or you can visit our website at aloyalcompanion.com. And don't forget, we have our Learning Center, which is at learn.aloyalcompanion.com. Lots of talks, worksheets, quick tips, things like that. So we're happy to help you in whatever way we can. So in 2 weeks, next time we're back is April 10th, and we're kind of going to go through something similar, but we're going to talk about the back leg. We're going to talk about tarsal hyperextension and what that looks like, and how you manage that. And if you didn't like the scary pictures, I'll have some more scary pictures next time, but I promise to warn you, so you can turn away if you don't want to see them. But otherwise, it's a gorgeous day here in Tucson. I think it's going to be like 72. Hopefully the weather's great where you are. Get out there and enjoy it. And remember, be safe, wear your mask, and we'll see you again soon. Bye, everybody. Take care.